So let's start with some introductions. My name is Carlos Valcárcel. I'm a character TD since 2004. I'm now a freelancer and I try to specialize in stylized character creation. I have worked with many softwares along my career. I started with 3ds Max, then transitioned for Softimage, where I built most of my career. Then had to work in Motion Builder, in Maya, and since 2015, I've been trying to transition to Houdini also for character animation and rigging. So we started at the time at object level, but now the software progress and new technologies are appearing for character animation like KineFX and APEX. I'm also now a rigging mentor at École NAD UQAC, which is a university in Montreal, and I'm mentoring APEX rigging to the demand of students. Last year was one team that wanted to do their final project in APEX, and this year at least 3 other riggers want to do the same. So with a raise of hand, just to know who knows what KineFX is. Okay, and who knows what APEX is? Okay, so we're gonna do some definitions here. So KineFX is a rigging and animation framework and toolset that allows you to create and edit characters all at the geometry level. So this is the definition you can find on the SideFX website. What this means is that when we rig characters, usually we do this at object level. Let's say in Maya, 3ds Max, Blender, we use joints objects. So the joints are objects and our controllers on the rig are objects. KineFX shifts that paradigm and tries to expose controllers and joints as points, so at the geometry level. So to do this, we need to add some special attributes on joints so we can transform them, because a point only has a position attribute, which would be its translation component, but we need to add other attributes to represent their rotation and scaling components. So once we add those attributes, there are now the viewport can now understand that and offer handles and manipulators to manipulate those joints, those points, as if they were objects. So there's a few challenges that come with representing joints as points, but it also opens the door for many possibilities. For example, in Houdini, for those of you that are familiar with Houdini, we know all the power of the sub-context, where we can create very big systems and all procedurally. So this means that now we can use this procedurality for the rigging. Let's say we want to use generator operators to generate joints. So this is something that would be kind of difficult on a rig to provide dynamic objects that appear on your rig or that they are based off a rule. So it opens the door for procedurality and also all the deformation operators that exist to deform geometry, we can now think of them also as transformation operators for joints. Let's say you wanted to skin a skeleton on top of another skeleton, you could do that. Or you can use a lattice on a skeleton. It would be possible to do this. And also at sub level, there's the wrangle nodes, which enable us to write some code, write our own operators. So if an operator is not available, we can always create it ourselves. And now KineFX is powered by APEX. So APEX is a new technology that is not only inside KineFX, it's across the board in Houdini. For example, I believe that the COPS context is driven by APEX. So APEX is an acronym meaning all-purpose execution. It is a graph evaluation framework that builds and runs graphs and outputs their results. In KineFX, character rigs are represented using APEX graphs. So here's the most basic APEX graph that we can have. It reads from left to right, and it always starts with an input node, and it ends with an output node. Between those two, we put some functions that are going to compute something. So in this example, we're going to do a simple addition. So we put an input node, and we put 2 inputs, which will be floating point values, A and B. We feed those to the node called add. It's going to add them, produce a result, and we're going to output this result. Simple enough. Now, here's a graph representing a character rig, but it's the same principle. In the beginning, we have an input node, with many inputs this time. One of those inputs is the character's geometry. Another input could be the character's skeleton. And many other inputs could be vector values representing the translation, rotation, and scaling of the controllers of the rig. Once we have those inputs, we put function nodes to compute something. In the case of character rigs, it's gonna most of the time compute the deformation of the character at every frame. So all of this outputs a deformed geometry that is fed to the output node, and often we also output the skeleton, the transformed skeleton also. So APEX is learning how to build those graphs, basically. And we're gonna talk about Project Outback, which is a side effect project to provide rigging and animation playground within KineFX APEX framework. So this is basically, we are building some assets that will be available to the community so they can try rigging with them or they can try animating with them. We're gonna provide already rigged characters. The first phase of, so this presentation is in fact a sequel of a previous presentation that was done during the spring, where we talked about this project. Just to show you the assets, here's a turntable of the environment and two characters being animated. Characters are named Aiko and Joey. They are playing hopscotch. And I just want to mention also the artistic direction has been done by Benoit Thériault, the animation by Camilo Guaman Gonzalez, and the modeling, texturing, lighting, rendering comp by Pedro Conti, and the rigging by myself. So this spring was phase one of the project, where I had to, first of all, test and learn the APEX system. And then I wanted to develop my own rigging framework within the APEX framework. What do I mean by rigging framework? I mean a framework for me to build my rigging functions that would respect my conventions. By that, I mean naming conventions, color conventions, iconography conventions. I also have modules to build my own rigging logics, my custom constraints, a module for mathematics so I can implement the missing mathematic functions that I would need in my rigs. And with all that, the objective was to build biped rigs for our characters, so body rigs. Now we're at the phase two of the project, which is going to explore the facial rigging. So phase one was done with Houdini 20.5. I now had to upgrade my system to Houdini 21 to make sure everything was working because there are many new features now. And I wanted also to test those new features to see if I could integrate them in my framework and benefit from them. And I wanted to investigate facial rigging techniques that I used in the past to produce rigs. So the facial rig that I'm gonna showcase today is not necessarily the best cartoon facial rig you will find. It's an exploration of many techniques that can be used or not to build your facial rigs. And also the final objective is to provide those facial rigs to the community. This will be, I think, in September. Before we explore the facial rigging techniques, I want to touch on what is the difference between a realistic facial rig and a cartoon facial rig. Well, there are many schools of thought when we think of driving a facial rig. Some people want it based off vicens, so shapes that correspond to sounds or to expressions. And some other animators would prefer a muscle activation technique where they would activate sliders that activate muscle groups. And this is often based off the facial action coding system, the popular FACS system. This gives very realistic results. It's a very powerful technique. It's mostly aimed for VFX work. And there's the school of thought of providing a rig that is more like a tool for modeling or for shaping the character at every frame. So this is more aimed towards cartoon animation, where the rig offers a lot of range, even if it goes beyond human morphology or human anatomy. It allows breaking the rules. And this is very important because in cartoon animation, we often need to exaggerate to have the most expressive rig. And this is what I'm trying to specialize now. And in terms of techniques, well, typically, first of all, facial rigging is difficult typically, and it can be built in many ways. We often hear like, I want a facial rig that is blend shape driven, or one that is joint based driven, or I want one built with order of operations, or one with UVM techniques. Some riggers have their preferences, some animators have their preferences too. But nowadays, it's mostly a combination of all of those techniques. So now let's explore some facial rigging techniques from the Project Outback. So here I'm showcasing the blend shapes that are active in this rig. So all I'm manipulating now are blend shapes, so they are located mostly on the lower part of the face, so the mouth, the lips, the mouth corners, the cheek puffs, the nostrils, and the eyelids also. For more information about the eyelids, you can always refer to my previous presentation where I give more information. I'm going to skip it in this presentation. So there are 134 blend shapes in this rig. This might sound like a lot, but believe me, there are rigs that have way more blend shapes than this. And think also that most blend shapes are left and right, so they are pairs of blend shapes. So we need to generate roughly the half of those blend shapes. And this is what we're going to explore, how Houdini can help us generate some of those blend shapes. And here are some techniques we will explore: wire deform sliding, joint deform, soft peak, custom operators, and sculpting. And here's an example of the eyelids blend shape from my other presentation, where I showcase an operator that would automatically close the eyelids to provide the neutral pose of a character. This is a task that can be a bit involving to have it perfectly done. So having an operator to help assist in that task really is helpful. It also provides in-between blend shapes, so we can have an interpolation that is not linear and that will slide on the sphere of the eyeball. So the first technique I want to talk about is a wire deform. This is a popular technique that is used by many riggers to have the base for a shape for let's say the mouth corners up or down, or even pulling the mouth corners for a wide shape or a narrow shape. So it's very simple. We first of all, the spheres that you see, I exaggerated the size. They represent the points of the curves. So we start by drawing a curve. I start with a 4-point curve that is going to act as a Bezier curve, because it's really easy to manipulate the 2 anchor points and then 2 tangents. You have great control on where the curve is going to be. And I place it on the rest geometry. From there, I'm going to model a new curve shape. So this is what we see right now. So I'm doing the frown shape here. And in parallel to that, we're going to capture the weights for the rest geometry to follow the rest curves. So we capture the rest geometry on the rest curves, and then we can inject a weight map in there and modulate the weighting that we have. The weight map is going to be used to specify where we want this effect to appear and what's going to be the fall off of this effect, where it's going to end. Once we've defined that, we can all plug this into a wire deform operator, and it gives us great control to build this shape. We can then put a delta mesh operator that's going to help smooth some deformations that are not accurate. And we can always put another operator, which would be a sculpt operator, to really make the shape even better by hand if we need to. Once we have that, we can mirror the blend shape from left to right, and we have 2 blend shapes available for us. Here, it's a variant of this technique. It's still a wire deform, but instead of pulling on the wire to define a new shape, I'm going to slide some points on the wire.
Yeah.
So here I define the rest wire, and I resample to have more points, and I write a small vex operator that's going to enable us to define a range of points on this wire, the red ones that you see. So we provide a minimum U and a maximum U on parameter value on the wire, and it's going to tag those points so they can stay together. Think of them as a train on a rail. So the red points gonna remain equidistant with each other. So I focus on, I place them along the lips of my character. I specify this range, and then I put a parameter to slide the U value of those joints, or not joints, those points along the wire, and it provides this effect. So we can see it gives great control to preserve the solidity of the mouth, like the lips are not shrinking or growing, but we have an accordion effect on the white dots. So the squash and stretch that is happening when we slide the controller is controlled by the wire. So this is a great technique because it offers great control to preserve our anchor points where we want them. And it makes the painting of weight maps more easy because the weight map of this would be more solid, and we're gonna use the fall off just to delimit where we want the effect to finish. But the weight map is not used to delimit this accordion effect. And once we have that, we continue with a delta mesh, and we can mirror the shape left to right. And you can notice that I built this shape asymmetrically, like the whole mouth is moving to the other side. Often when we build blend shapes, we build them symmetrically, and then we split them left to right with a weight map. Both techniques are important. We just need to use them at the correct time. So in this case, because the whole mouth goes to one side, I cannot split this. I need a way to mirror it to the other side. Another very popular technique is to build a blend shape with a simple joint and skinning system. So here, because in KineFX, joints can be points, I can easily extract my points from the rest geometry. I can just select some points and delete all the rest of the geometry except those points. I then add the transform attributes, then they become joints, and I can put a rig pose node to place those joints where I want them for the final position. Once I have that, I can skin my rest geometry on those joints, on the rest position of those joints, and I can drop a skeleton blend node to blend between my initial pose and the final pose of the joints, and I can see the effect that is happening. Once I have that, I can refine my skinning manually by weight painting, and I can always go back and modify my joints position. So I have a whole recipe there that is completely tweakable. And once we have that, as usual, a little delta mesh where needed, and in this case, I split the shape left to right. So I built a symmetrical shape, and I split it left to right. And the splitting operator is also a custom operator, which enables you to have a procedural weight map to split from left to right, where you can determine where is the center, where are the extremities, the left and right, where's the fall off going to start and where it's going to end, and what the contrast you want to have there. So there's a contrast slider to tweak this. Another very easy technique, some shapes are so simple, you would just need to have a push operator, or in Houdini is a soft peak operator. So it's just going to push along the normals of the object. So very easy to write in Vex. You can then modulate this with a weight map, and as usual, delta mesh and split the shape or mirror the shape. And we can also write our own custom operators. This is what I've done here. I wrote a spherify operator. So I start by placing a joint where to create the cheek puff blend shape. I place a joint like a bit more or less in the middle of the cheek. And then I'm gonna reinterpret the location of every point, the coordinates of every point in the space of the joint. So it's a change of space. So the point position, instead of being expressed from relative to the center of the object, now they're going to be represented relative to the center of the joint. This allows me to normalize the position of each joint, which means that the whole character is going to become a sphere around the joint of a unit of 1. Then you can multiply by a radius, and you can multiply by a weight map to specify where you want this effect. And this gives a very easy way to generate this shape. Once it's done, we mirror on the other side again. And here's an example of another blend shape that is created with a joint deformation operation, is the mouth twist. So I place a joint in the middle of the mouth and I rotate along the z-axis and I get this final shape. However, if I were to blend, like once I have the blend shape, if I were to interpolate this blend shape from the rest pose to the full final pose, it would look strange. It would not look as if the mouth was twisting. It would look as if the mouth is morphing or distorting towards the final shape. And to avoid this, we need to generate some in-between shapes so we can interpolate along many in-betweens, and this will give the illusion that it's in fact interpolating in a spherical space. So to do this, we can write our own custom interpolation operator in Vex. And a blend shape, basically, it's a delta. It's a difference between the final position, the target position, and the rest position. And in terms of Cartesian coordinates, it's just a vector, a position vector, a difference between them. So to do this, we need to express our delta in a different space. So we can think of each point position as being a direction instead of being as a position. Then we can store this and we can compute the delta of rotation between two directions. This gives us a rotation delta. And we can think also of the distance along this direction to hit the point as the radius. So we can also have a radius delta. So once we have parametrized our blend shape this way, we can then interpolate a quaternion with the slurp operator and the radius with a lerp operator. This allows us to create our own spherical interpolator for blend shapes. And we can then put this into a for loop to generate as many in-betweens as we want. So in my case, I wanted to generate two in-betweens. And so the for loop goes 2 times and it generates an interpolated value at 1/3 and one at 2/3. And I have my final shape at 100%. So once we have this, we pack this as packed primitives and we mirror this on the other side and I get 6 blend shapes this way. So when we talk about in-between blend shapes, we need to put some attributes as metadata on those blend shapes so the linear interpolator that's going to be used in Apex knows when to trigger those blend shapes. So to know which kind of data to pack with your geometry, I recommend using the character blend shapes add node, which is a sub node inside FX. This is the workflow this is the workflow to add blend shapes to a KineFX character. But there's an option that you can check to have in-betweens, and I invite you to investigate this data to know what you need to build as data. Because if you build your own interpolator, you might want to feed this data as you loop over your blend shape to create them. It's easier because you have the data there, so you can inject it directly in your packed primitives. So this is gonna build a lot of blend shapes. If I were to save this on disk as is, it would save the full body geometries for all of my blend shapes. In my case, it ended up at 232,000 kilobytes. But we can optimize this because in Houdini, when you use a blend shape operator, if you put an ID attribute, the ID attribute is going to be used to make the correspondence between the rest points and the target points. So because interpolator needs to know which point to interpolate to which target point. So the ID attribute is used for that. And this opens the door for optimization because now that I don't need to care about point order, I can in fact delete all the points that do not participate in a blend shape. So this is going to save a lot of data. I can delete all the polygons on my geometry. I can delete all the attributes. All I need is points, and points have positions. This is all I need. So when I save this now to disk, it's only 585 kilobytes. And it also speeds up the read. And so all of what we've done up to now was in SOP context. We were preparing data to put into Apex. Now that we are in Apex, we need to connect all of this to the rig. So there's already an auto rig component that is available to do this. It will take all your blend shapes that are provided and it's going to create sliders for each one of them. However, if you want to link your blend shapes to your own rigging interface like I did, you will probably need to write your own functions to make these connections. For example, my rigging interface is not one-for-one relationships. Sometimes I use only the a positive axis to trigger a shape and then a negative direction for another shape. Let's say the cheek puff, that I have two shapes, one to, well, in both directions, so I need to take this into account, the negative side of the axis that is being activated. So, and in other cases, you will want to put multipliers in there or do some funky mathematics to combine shapes together. So you need to understand how the blend shape operator works in Apex. So the node to look for is the SUP KineFX character blend shape core. Once you study this one, you understand that there's a first input that is the geometry, the rest geometry with packed blend shapes. And the other input is a geometry that's going to hold detail attributes, which are going to be floating point values for every blend shape you want to activate. So this is simple enough, but we need to generate those floating point values. So if I go back like this, I'm going to show you now a function. So this is what I call my blend shape computer, which on the left side is going to fetch all the translation and rotation value of my controllers. It's going to compute some data to output a float value per blend shape. So this you can do by hand, by building this graph, but it becomes overwhelming quite fast. And there might be a lot of repetition also, because some logics are always the same. So the best way for me to do this is with Apex script. It's wonderful that Apex supports both visual programming and code. So, and this is a perfect example where coding is going to make the management of complexity way easier. So you can write simple functions that are going to generate the floats that we want. And each function represents a node in Apex. And the arguments of the function represent input ports for those nodes. And to put those functions into a graph, we just need to call those functions. So I just have a function later on in my code that calls all of my individual functions, and it's going to create this graph for me automatically. I can then save this graph as a subgraph that I'm going to reuse in my rigs in the future. And so now I have a node that I can load in my graph, and I can connect it to my interface. And if I've used a correct naming convention, I can cycle through all the input ports of my subgraph to find the objects they need to connect to. So this is another way where we can procedurally connect our objects to our functions. So this is very powerful. Okay, now let's switch technique. We've talked a lot about blend shapes. Let's do some joint-based deformation. So here for the eyebrow, I chose to try a technique with joints. So I put the cubes that you see, the white cubes represent joints. So I have 4 joints per eyebrow, and I have another joint just underneath the eyebrow. This is a region very important to manage. Especially when we lower the eyebrow, we need really to manage this space here. So what you see right now, it looks like a blend shape activation, because when we see those 2D slider style objects, like sometimes they are called joysticks, we've seen this a lot to drive blend shapes. What I'm doing right now is I'm driving joints with those sliders, because there's a node called skeleton blend that allows us to blend hierarchies of joints as if they were blend shapes. So this is very powerful because it gives me this fun interface as if it were blend shape, and then I can animate the joints after that as single joints to refine my deformation. So this offers a lot of flexibility. And those sliders don't need to be exposed only in translation, they can also be exposed in rotation and scaling. And how to prepare this? Well, here you see I defined some joints around the eyebrow, and I put as much rig poses as I want to have target expressions. And with the rig pose, I pose each joint individually on the left side. Once I have my poses, in my case I have 5 poses, I merge them as packed primitives, and this enables me to loop over them. So that's the green box that you see. I'm looping over the left joint poses to mirror those to the other side. And it's also adding metadata to name those skeleton blend shapes so they can be understood by the system later on. And to generate the sliders, we could also generate them in SAP world, but we can also write code in APEX to generate those sliders. So this is part of my framework where I have a module called RigFab, which enables me to create an auto rig component that gives me parameters to create those sliders. So I can here simply give a name, a polarity that indicates left or right, and minimum and maximum values. And it's going to detect automatically if it's a 1D slider, a 2D slider, or a 3D slider. And it's going to take care of the iconography for me, of the size of things and the colors. And it's a reusable pattern that I can use in many places now. Okay, another technique or another thing that we have to consider when building a facial rig, especially when it's a cartoon facial rig, it's being able to scale the iris and scaling the pupil. In realistic characters, we also need to do this, but to a range very limited. So we can do it easily with just a joint on the iris, and often it's good enough. On a cartoon character, often we need to exaggerate this a lot. And there are many ways we can do this. It can be a joint-based approach or a custom operator that's going to operate over each point of the eyeball and do the deformation specifically for that. Here I'm showcasing a joint-based approach where I will put a joint for every cross-section of the eye. So what I do is I first put a bound node that's going to be a bounding sphere that's going to detect the center of the eyeball. I can then make a group to tag the point just behind the eye so we can get a sense of what's the direction of the eye. Once we have that, we can then build a frame of reference for the eyeball. That's what we see right now. So we have a XYZ frame of reference. And we can tag every cross section. That's the points that are selected right now. And then we can express those positions in the reference space of the eyeball and determine their U value along the length of the eyeball. Once we have that, we can then generate in APEX joints that are going to match those U positions. So they're going to be exactly aligned where they should be aligned. In the past, when I was doing this in other softwares, I had to do it visually and manually. I would place them, and precision is very important for that to work. Here, with a simple custom operator, we can be very, very precise in that regard. So once we have that, we can scale the iris controller, and you see that the eyeball is going to retain its spherical state. And we can do the pupil also, that is just a child of the iris, basically. So when we scale the iris, every cross section is going to go back in space and is going to scale up to adjust to a sphere equation. And the pupil, we might think often that we only need to scale it, but it's really important to also expose rotation and translation on the pupil. It happens that you need to shift those a little bit according to the camera angle, and giving this possibility to animators really help their animation. Another pattern or rigging pattern or technique that we need to have absolutely when we do cartoon animation is lattice deformation. So here I'm going to use the lattice to deform the head of the character, and it's going to give a really cool squash effect. So this is good for squash and stretch, but it's also good to give an angle to the head if you need to accommodate for a camera angle, or to create some smearing effects to kind of fake motion blur. So the way I do this, a lattice is always a cubic geometry with divisions. So we first place that lattice where we need it. And then what I do is from the divisions of the lattice, I'm going to extract 4 points. One at the top, one at the bottom, and 2 in between. Those 2 will be tangents for a control spline. And I place them exactly where I want according to how I want them to bend. So we're going to see them appear very soon. But once we have okay, here are the 4 joints that are going to drive a control spline. So here I'm creating the controllers, and then I'm building a control spline, and the control spline is going to provide a joint per lattice subdivision. Once we have that, we can skin the lattice on those joints with a proximity weight, automatic weighting. It's going to be perfect because the joints are exactly where they should be. And then we can repack this into our character and apply the lattice deformer to our geometry. And this is a very powerful technique because the lattice deformation, it's a subsequent layer of deformation on top of other deformations. So here, think that the character could blink the eyes, could open the mouth, could do whatever, and the lattice deformation is going to happen after that. And the power of this deformer is that the binding is dynamic. It's not like skin painting that is static. It's the binding is going to adapt to any previous deformation that is there. So I'm very happy that this works in APEX. And this is new to Houdini 21, that it is available. And the control spline, you can define your own custom rotation interpolation and scaling interpolation also. And this is why you see the squash and stretch happening in this specific way. It could be tweaked with ramped parameters to have really the effect that you want. And here's another place where I place a lattice. I call this the muzzle area of the face. So starting from the bridge of the nose to the chin, I put another lattice here. Again, it's just to cheat some poses or provide some really squash and stretch animation here. And this one, it's more obvious that it needs a fall off. So we need to be able to paint a fall off area to end the effect of the lattice. If not, we would see a real big demarcation of the deformation there. Unfortunately, the lattice operator does not support a weight map right now, but we can make our own operator based off a blend shape operator. So here what I did is I just packaged a blend shape operator on in a subnet to accommodate blending between only 2 geometries. So it's the operator on the right there. The first one is the lattice deformation. So the node that I created is called GeoBlend, and it's going to blend between the geometry before the lattice and the geometry after the lattice deformation. So once we have that, it enables us to manage this blend with a weight map, and we can reuse this for any other operator that we would need to blend this way that would not support a weight attribute already. And here's inside the GeoBlend, just so you can see it's a blend shape operator inside, and it's a bit complicated there are a few nodes to connect to this operator, so packaging it in a simpler node makes the reuse of it way easier. Another technique that is very similar to the lattice deformation is called the point deform operator, or the cage deformation. It's very similar to a lattice, except that it accepts a cage that is not cubic. So in this case, here's what the effect that I want to achieve. I want to achieve very extra wide open eyes. So if I want to open an eye very wide, usually it's a kind of a stretch effect. So we're going to raise the eyebrows, we're going to open the upper eyelid to the maximum and the lower eyelid to the maximum. But if we just do that, the eyes remain spherical, and there's a limit to how much I can open the eyelid. Like they're going to roll up inside the head at some point, and it's not going to give this effect of very surprised eye. So we have to, in fact, to deform the skull and deform the eyeball to give this effect of very, very surprised. So this is why I need a point deform operator or an operator that has dynamic binding once again, because the eyelids, the eyeball direction is going to move. So we need an extra layer of deformation after that. Unfortunately, a point deform operator, I think, is not available in APEX yet. However, there's a way to create one. Here's an example of the cage that I'm using. So I just drew some discs and I snapped the points on landmarks of the face, of the orbit of the eyes. And you can see the outer blue points, they're just gonna stick to the point positions that they are snapping to. So they are easy to drive because remember, they need to follow the geometry, the deformation. So they're just gonna copy the point position from a deformed geometry. The yellow one do the same thing, but we need to take into account that they're gonna be animated by the animator. So they need to become joints. So they need to have rotation and scaling attributes. We could find them or compute them according to the normal and the tangents of those points. But because it's a region that's going to deform a lot, it could look unstable. So to have a very stable and really well-aligned joints here, we can simply take the orientation and scaling of the head controller instead. And for the point in the middle of the eye, this one should not follow the geometry because the eyelid, the eyeball, they're going to move. We don't want this point to move. We want it to stay in the center of the eye sockets. So this one is inheriting the head transformation completely as if it were a child of the head. And once we have created our cage, we have a rest cage and a deformed cage by the animator, we can then subdivide both of them to give a smoother result. And to implement this point deform operator, I'm not going to be able to explain it here, but our friends in Denmark from the Tumblehead Animation Studio made a short called Turbulence, and they provided a making of their film, and there's a tutorial there on how to do your custom operator. So I'm going to reference this and give a big shout out to Magnus Muller at Tumblehead Animation Studio for making this tutorial. I really recommend watching it. There are some gems in this tutorial. So once we have this, we can see the result here. So the skull has been deformed. However, the eyeball also is deformed, and we lose the circularity of the iris and the pupil. So we need to take this also into account. So here on the left side, I have two cage deform operators, and then a delta mush to fix some deformation, to smooth out some deformations around the eye sockets. And then I have new custom operators that are going to that are going to recover the sphericity of the iris and the pupil. So they store the offset of the iris and the pupil pre-deformation, and they reapply it post-deformation at the new position of the pupil. One other technique that is very important to make sure it works in Apex is riveted controllers. So this again is a technique that provides extra deformation after previous deformation. So here you can see that I'm activating the cheek puff blend shape with the triangular controllers, and all the pink dots are joints that follow the geometry, and they're gonna point deform, joint or bone deform the geometry after that. So it's just like a new layer of skinning on top of existing deformation. So the difference is that the rest geometry is gonna be a dynamic deformed geometry, and we need to make sure that our controllers are going to track the geometry. So there's a constraint available for that in Houdini, which is called the prim constraint. So it allows to track a location on a polygon, and it's going to output a translation and a rotation transformation. In my case, I also wanted to take the scaling into account, so I packaged this constraint in my own constraint, and I can provide an argument to specify the scaling that I want in there. Okay, I'm gonna go a bit faster because time is flying. In cartoon rigs, we also often see that when we move the jaw, often the nose is following a lot, like more than on a realistic character. And this is a really fun effect, even if not realistic at all. And sometimes we want it, sometimes we don't want. So what I did is I built a chain of joints from the bridge of the nose, the nasation, the nose, and then the subnasal. And I aim this chain towards the mandibular. And there are sliders to determine how much each joint should align with the mandibular. So we can gauge this effect as from 0 to 1, let's say. So here's what you see. When I click on this cog icon, there are some sliders appearing. This is a new feature of Houdini 21, which is called control groups, which provides an API to generate some sliders very easily for you. And here you see another type of slider, which is a switch selector or like a combo box, which allows me to select, in my case, is the space of the upper teeth. Because you see the upper teeth moving with the skull, like I'm deforming the skull right now, which is not correct in a realistic word. But if it gives a good effect for the nose, let's go for it. But what do we do with the upper teeth? So maybe we want it because maybe it's gonna help close them out more easily in that position. But if it looks like it's sliding along the way, maybe we want to anchor this with the real skull. So the selector switch allows you to specify what object, what joint are the upper teeth gonna follow. And same for the cheekbone, I can select what part of the nose or to what amount they're gonna follow the nose. So all of this is just to configure how much the jaw, the muzzle area is gonna move. And I also have a jaw controller that is a 1-for-1 relationship with the jaw in case you need to have overbite or underbite or scaling the jaw to switch to tweak the silhouette of your character or to cheat some effect. This is just a joint-based deformation. And speaking of control groups, like I also have some sliders to control the mouth corners location from the upper teeth to the lower teeth, so you can select the height where they will be. Same for the upper lip, lower lip. So let's say you want to have a character that is sad, maybe you want to anchor the mouth corners to the mandibula. Or if it wants to be happy, maybe you want to anchor them with the skull. You also have a seal slider that enables sealing the upper lip with the lower lip, and then a location to determine where the sealing should happen, like upper teeth or lower teeth. Okay, this is just very quickly just to show that the earring is kind of aligning with gravity. And to do this, it's a simple setup to do in rigging. So I started prototyping it with the APEX graph node. So I knew it wouldn't take too much nodes, so it wouldn't make sense to try to go in code. It would be faster just to drop some nodes and connect them. And now there's a new feature in Houdini called the fuse graph. It's from the APEX component node. You can provide a delta graph to be fused on your character rig graph. So this is what is happening right now. My graph is very simple, and it has one object like the earring root, which is already existing in my character rig. I think that all my other nodes are new. So when Houdini fuses the graphs, it's gonna recognize what already exists, and it's not gonna recreate them, they are already there. But everything that is new, it's gonna add it to the graph. So it means new nodes and new connections. So this is a very cool way to prototype your stuff and replicate it in your rig very easily without coding anything. And it also accounts for left and right side. Here I prototype something on the left side, and because I have a correct naming convention, I can activate the mirror checkbox and provide the polarity tokens that I need, and it's gonna also construct my prototype on the right side of my character. So this is one of my favorite features of Houdini 21. So now let's just see the final result. So here I'm manipulating the rig. You can see that I'm activating here the eyelids blend shapes, which have in-betweens to slide over the eyeball. Here I'm activating the joints blend shapes of the eyebrows. Rotating the head, the eyes are tracking. The head lattice, squash and stretch. And if we loop it again, here's the blend shapes for the mouth corners, blend shape for the mouth twist, muzzle lattice, and yeah, cycling back to the eyelids. And here, just to test how the range of my rig, I try to do some expressions. I'm not an animator, but I try to provide some facial animation that would squash and other that would stretch. And you can see, like the cheek puff one, you can see how the eyes are extra wide open and the iris have been scaled down. And it really adds a lot of ways to communicate, to give characters more expressive. And in terms of interpolation, like I wanted to know if my rig also interpolated correctly. So I just dropped all my poses on a timeline and just gave a default interpolation. And I wanted to look if nothing was breaking. So this is the final result. Okay. So for the future, I have other things that I want to explore. Like I said before, this rig was meant to explore many techniques to see if we would be able to do them with KineFX and in APEX. So I want to try in the future to have more of a curve-based approach instead of blend shapes for all the mouth region and the eyelid region. And I want to experiment with corrective blend shapes also. I know those two things already exist in Houdini. I've tested them with at the university with the students. I just didn't have time to put them in the facial rig, but they are possible, and it is easy to manage corrective blend shapes in Houdini. There's also a pose space deformation interpolators. Wow, pose space deformation interpolators in Houdini in APEX that are already available. So I'm looking forward to exploring those and also making my own interpolators. And I want to investigate also rigging textures, like let's say driving a displacement map or a bump map to provide more details on some deformation areas, like providing skin folds, for example. And I want to explore also more custom deformers.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I don't have a lot of experience with character animation. I've only been using Houdini for about a year now. But I'm just curious, what's the interoperability with KineFX and APEX between Houdini and other animation software? I'm imagining it's pretty much proprietary to Houdini, especially with the APEX system. But I'm just wondering, like, I guess as far as like imports, like does KineFX APEX allow importing of like USD FBX files to be able to import that into the KineFX APEX system, or how does that all work?
Okay. I'm not going to be able to answer your question fully. What I know, I think there's a link between Houdini and Unreal. Like at the launch yesterday, I think they showed some stuff like that. And I think APEX can and Unreal can communicate. Do you know? In terms of what you can import, one workflow that we often see is importing FBX character already being skinned, and so a skeleton and a geometry bound together, and then we can generate a rig in APEX to animate it. In terms of USD is a framework I don't know how to define it, but you could in USD like import your data as geometry, and once you have the geometry, then use it into APEX. But I don't think there's a USD bridge already built inside APEX. But in Houdini, like you can take your USD stuff, use it as geometry anywhere, and then do what you want with it. So yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to answer your questions.
Okay. I'm not super familiar with it anyways. I'm just kind of curious about it all. But
okay.
What? What's the advantage of the proceduralism of the whole rigging system? How easy would it be to apply the whole rig to a completely different character?
I think this is what I need to work on my next phase. But on phase one with the two biped characters, which are very different, a kangaroo and a girl, they're both sharing the same rig. It was just a matter of copying my graph to my new kangaroo scene and just replacing the guides. And the way I build my guides is very minimal. Like I don't have guides for every twist joint. The twist joints are generated by my APEX graph. So I just have to replace the main joint positions on my character, and then the whole rig can be built. Sometimes you will want to adjust for the scaling of controllers, but I try to provide as much of initial scaling or size of controllers that is relative to the chains you are building. So already you're in a ballpark that kind of works. And I'm also working as a side project on a procedural way to place those guides initially. So this is super helpful. Like you can literally have many characters on top. You all put them into a switch node, and then you switch the character you want, and the skeleton adapts to that position. So that's some R&D project. It's not fully ready yet, but it's really fun when this works. It makes the job so fast, so much faster.
Do you need a skin mesh, right? You're starting with the model with already skinned, and then you layer the.
Okay.
Right.
So the question is, do you have to start with geometry that is already skinned on existing joints? Is that correct? That's the question. Okay. That's a very, very good question, because when I started in Apex, all the tutorials that I would be finding were exactly based on that workflow. And this didn't work for me. That's not how I usually work. Like, I first create my rig, which is going to create my joints, and then I skin once I have a functional rig, so I can see the deformation as I'm moving the rig. So this is what my framework has been implementing. I only provide guides on my character. I don't provide a skeleton. So as I build the rig, the joints are being generated as part of the rig and stored in a skeleton that is being built along the way. So when I chain auto rig components, the skeleton is going to evolve and put more and more joints in there. Once I have this, then I branch out and I put a scene animate and a scene invoke, and I extract the skeleton from there, and I extract the geometry, and then I can skin as in a usual workflow. So then I can move my rig. I have my rest skeleton, my transformed skeleton, and my rest skin, and then I do my skinning, and then I just re-inject this. I repack the data into my character, and we have more a typical workflow that is more like we used to do it in other software. So yeah, to me, this was something I really was important to me, that I don't want to provide all the joints in before, because sometimes you have to make some decisions after, like how many twist joints do I want? What is going to be the mathematics that's driving them? If I have to provide them before creating the character, what is going to ensure me they are exactly where they should be? So to do it, I would need to reproduce the same logic that is both in my rig and in my guides. So I don't want to do the job twice. So that's why I don't provide a skeleton in input, but it's being created along the way, and I skin only after the rig is done, which is really opposite to many tutorials that we see.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks everybody. This was the last question, and this is it.
Good night.
Thank you.